This is another wall, it's actually part of the international wall in West Belfast. Again, we see representations of the Republican struggle. This says, "For what day the sons of Roisin, unbowed, unbroken, our struggle continues." On the left, you can see Charlie Hughes, who was a volunteer for the Republican movement, and on the right, you can see Leila Khalid. Underneath, "We will rise again, empires fall and tyrannies perish. We will rise again." James Connolly, the leader of the Irish Citizens' Army in 1916, that fought in the rebellion in Dublin. So as we go along here, I mean, the summary of Irish history is that 800 years ago, the English arrived in Ireland. Ireland became their first colony as such. And ever since they arrived, there has been resistance and rebellion to what we now call British colonial rule in Ireland. We had many unsuccessful rebellions throughout each century. In 1798, we had the United Irishmen, which was Protestant, Catholic and dissenter, who together joined to try and free Ireland from the yoke of a British tyranny. And indeed, there was a French force of over 1,000 troops who came to Ireland to help in the rebellion. Ultimately, the rebellion failed. All the Irish who rose up in resistance were brutally murdered and massacred, and the French troops were treated as prisoners of war and exchanged for English troops, British troops in the Anglo-Napoleonic Wars. So as we go along here, some of these murals here represent civic groups. This is the Community Rescue Service that tries to find people that are lost on mountains or, God forbid, have fallen off the Cave Hill or a similar monument or mountain. As we go along here, here's something for Öcalan. It's the guys involved in the Turkish-Kurdish rebellion. Not necessarily, 100%. Not necessarily my cup of tea, especially when I consider what the Kurds have done in Syria. The Kurds claim to be a socialist group, anti-imperialist and anti-colonial, and yet they accept the power and they accept the backing of America. They wouldn't be in the position they are in Syria without American finance and American arms. And if and when the Americans are eventually kicked out of Syria, I think you'll soon see the Kurds calling for an autonomous region within Syria, but not an independent state, because I don't think it could survive. I don't see how people who claim to be socialists can then accept the wherewithal and armaments from the biggest imperialist country in the world, the biggest financer of world wars. So here we are, we're leaving what is the Falls Road in West Belfast, which is a Catholic Irish Nationalist Republican area. And if you can see these gates just in front of me, this is called one of the peace lanes. These gates are closed at night. They're only open for access because it's a thoroughfare to the city centre and also a main thoroughfare for the local hospital, the Royal Victoria Hospital. So as you leave Catholic Nationalist West Belfast, you come into the counter-insurgency area, as I would describe it, the colonial loyalist heartland of the Shankill Road. So you go through both sets of these gates. As you can see, it's like a no man's land just here. And when you get through the other side, you will then see kind of loyalist, unionist, paramilitary murals on the walls. So it's an expression of their political identity. So we'll maybe just stay here because the camera gets a better view of being across the road. So here we are, Shankill Road, Gusty Spence. He's an expired loyalist terrorist. There's the Red Hand of Ulster, one of the paramilitary groups. And then here it becomes part of the Ulster Protestant connection with the British Army and the different how would you describe it? The different scenarios and campaigns over the years. This is a memorial to the First World War, where 100,000 Irishmen also joined the British Expeditionary Forces. They went to fight so that little countries like Belgium didn't live under the yoke of German imperialist control. Somehow they seem to forget that Britain asked them to help free Belgium so that the Belgians didn't have to live under a foreign flag, speak a foreign language, and give their money to a foreign exchequer, which is exactly what we in Ireland were doing in 1814. We had the British flag flying over Dublin Castle. We had the English language imposed upon us, and our taxation was going to London, and from London it was being partially returned. So we were ruled from Westminster, both financially, militarily and politically. But while the Irish Republicans and the nationalist people see comparisons between Palestine and Ireland, we have the opposite here. We have this pro-unionist, loyalist rump that sees Israel and the likes of South Africa as kind of fellow victims of rebellion and disloyalty. So this man here is Lieutenant Colonel Henry Patterson, DSO, Distinguished Service Order. He was born in Ballymahon, Westmeath, now Longford, County Ireland, to a Protestant father, Catholic mother. Joined the British Army and travelled. He was involved in the Boer War. He was in Kenya and other places. So a colonial imperialist military officer who spent his time subjecting the people of other countries to British foreign colonial rule. And as you come right to the end of this is about how Patterson was involved in the kind of the Jewish battalions that were in the British Army in the First and the Second World War, which eventually led to the establishment of Israel on the 14th of May 1948, and a Nakba, which saw 750,000 Palestinians expelled from their ethnic homelands in the ethnic cleansing by the Zionist people who previously were called the terrorists of the Stern Gang. He was reinterred in Tel Aviv. It says, in all of Jewish history, we have never had a Christian friend as understanding and devoted. So that's all you need to know about Colonel Patterson. The fact that he was a devoted Zionist, the fact that he had a proven record in subjecting and subduing and oppressing people in their own lands. It's no surprise that he found favour and political credibility with the Zionists, who in turn decided to ethnically cleanse Palestine for their own political fulfilment of their biblical prophecy. Although it's well known that the early Zionists were secular and that the ones that came after that weren't religious, although Israeli society has moved further and further to the right as time has gone by. Hello everyone, my name's Fry Hughes and I live in Belfast in the north of Ireland, a place that I consider to be still held under British colonial imperialist military and financial occupation. I'm here on the Falls Road in Belfast, and over the next 15 to 20 minutes I hope to give you like an abridged version of Irish history. So I'm going to start off here. This is what we call the International Wall on the Falls Road in West Belfast. What we have here are a representation of international politics as seen through the eyes of the Republican Irish nationalist community in the north of Ireland. So these murals are visited by thousands of people every day over the course of the summer. There are black taxi tours, there are the obligatory bus tours that go around the city. But I'm going to tell you part of Irish history, and I'm going to show you some of our historic and touristic sites as I go along. So we can see here in these murals, we have still Republican prisoners in British jails on Irish soil. Then we have a mural that represents the solidarity between Ireland and Palestine. Oppression breeds resistance. They took his land, his legs, and finally they took his life. It's a young man who was shot on the Gaza-Israeli border, unarmed, nothing but a stone in his hand, already in a wheelchair when he was murdered. This is the 10 hunger strikers from 1981, Irish Republicans who died for the fight for political status within the jails when Margaret Thatcher tried to criminalise the Irish Republican struggle as criminals and terrorists. And many people in the world see them as a national liberation army and people who fought against injustice, colonisation, imperialism, and fought for the reunification of Ireland, which was divided by the British in 1922. The partition of Ireland after a national war of liberation, 1918 to 1921, which was preceded by the 1916 rebellion. So a brief history of Ireland would say that the English arrived 800 years ago, and through a campaign of colonisation, partial colonisation in the north of Ireland and conquest of the whole island of Ireland, they banned the Catholic religion at one stage under the penal laws. It was illegal for a Catholic priest to be resident in the country under death threat, basically. And there was a bounty of £5 on his head, which was a huge amount of money in that time. And then also we have, as part of the penal laws, Catholics couldn't own certain types of land, they couldn't own a horse, all types of discrimination against the ethnic indigenous population. The idea being that as they tried to destroy the culture and the religion, the two things, or two of many things that really bring society together in a communal unity through religion or culture or language, they more or less, people say they didn't ban the language, they ignored it officially, but the result was that less than probably 5% are fluent Irish speakers in Ireland today, and 95% of people are fluent English speakers. It's not necessarily because people want to speak English, it's because the language was decimated, and what we've ended up with is a linguistic colonisation of Ireland along with a military occupation. You can see this mural here in the background. That was done by Carlos Latoufe in 2023, the famous left-wing Brazilian artist, cartoonist. You can find all the stuff all over Twitter and Facebook, social media. It says here Ireland, Palestine, and it relates to Bobby Sands, a hunger striker in 1981, fighting for political status in a British jail on Irish soil, who died after 66 days on hunger strike. And then the parallels with Palestine and the death of Kader Adnan. On the 2nd of May 2023, Bobby Sands died on the 5th of May 1981, and he died in an Israeli-administered prison. So both revolutionaries, both people fighting for their lands, their nation and their country. Some were early judicially executed as such by being allowed to starve to death in the prison system under which they were unjustly and partially reserved. So Ireland was partitioned in 1921-1922 after a national war of liberation. But the problems that continue today, especially in the north of Ireland, come from the policy of British personal colonisation of the north of Ireland and what was called the Plantation of Ulster. So what we had were English and Scottish settlers brought in to manage land, agricultural land, towns and villages that had been Catholic Indigenous Irish and were ethnically cleansed for the purposes of creating a stronger hold for the British establishment in Ireland. Now, this led to, if there were 5 million people in Ireland before 1922, we ended up with approximately 1.5 million in the new state created by Britain called Northern Ireland, which I don't accept, and 3.5 million people in the Republic of Ireland. So that started like sectarian ethnic divisions, which hadn't really existed prior to the colonisation process. What you had was the indigenous population being militarily oppressed by a foreign government. And you had the rebellions against that. But then once you created this sectarianisation of society, it in itself led to social divisions and also political and religious divisions, because the English and Scottish settlers were Protestant by religion and English by their political associations, and the Irish were Catholic by their religion and ethnically Irish by their culture and language and music and clan system and basically everything that had gone before the British occupation. So this is one of these. So after the division, what you had was a divided society where pro-British Protestants lived in one part of the city really, and pro-Irish Catholics, nationalists lived in another part. And as part of that, there was always sectarian tension, and there was always the possibility of intercommunal sectarian strife. Now, in 1969, we had really basically 50 years of unionist one-party misrule, where the Catholic Irish population were treated as second-class citizens. They were discriminated against in jobs and housing and opportunities in life as such. And the civil rights movement then came into being in 1968-69. This called basically for a democratisation of society, an end of the one-party rule at Stormont, the local assembly, and one man, one vote, equal fair allocation in housing and employment, and basically an end to discrimination against what was probably 40% of the population here. So the imbalance that came with partition was deliberately created to create a pro-British state. And then with the civil rights movement in 1968-69, their call for the democratisation of society was met with violence from the state, and as such that led to ethnic tensions, the heightening of sectarian divisions. And we now have what are called the peace walls. These are in Belfast. This is the one between the Irish Falls Road and British Shankill Road. So we can see here that this wall is approximately 1.5 miles long. So this is the Loyalist Unionist community on the right. And behind these walls are the nationalist Irish community of the Clonard and the Falls Road. So as you look up the street, you can see the taxis that are making a very healthy profit from the tours. This wall was originally put up by British Army sappers. You can see here that this is like metal, and this is a concrete slab that has been slipped in. And then we have another metal barrier. So you can picture the two metal barriers put in place as almost like clips, and this concrete wall being inserted between it. And that wasn't enough to stop the violence, because you could still throw bombs, petrol bombs, bricks and bottles over the wall. So then they raised it a second time, as you can see, with the green fencing, the British Army green fencing, and then the further fencing on the top. So I've read that I've lived in Belfast all my life, but I've read that there are over, I think, 60 peace walls. We're 25 years into the peace process, but a lack of violence does not mean peace. It just means that there's a lack of violence within society. But we're going to go around shortly and see what's behind this wall, and maybe further explain that basically with the colonisation of the north of Ireland and with the sectarianisation of society, what we have is a colonial rump that's been here from the 17th, 16th, 17th century, that spends its time keeping British policy and their troops and people who come along and see these walls, don't understand fully the complications of what's happening, but this is what we have, and this is what has divided the people. Colonisation, sectarianisation of society, a rump unionist loyalist group that refuses to integrate with their Irish Catholic neighbours, and basically, you know, this will never change here.